Well, we saw some amazing scenes in Sydney yesterday with hundreds of people wearing the Star of David, waving Israeli and Australian flags, calling for an end to the anti-Semitism that swept across this country since October 7 last year. A very different type of protest compared to the pro-Palestinian marches we've been forced to endure week in and week out. No one waving terrorist flags or spitting abuse. There were, however, plenty of signs saying, "Elbow, the world is watching." One of the speakers at yesterday's rally was former Labor MP Michael Danby, and he joins me now. Michael, tell us about yesterday. Particularly, I'm interested in the feedback that you were getting from Jewish Australians who attended that march.
Well, it was in Martin Place. There's about 3,500 people. The reaction was very strong, and they weren't just Jewish Australians. There were a lot of Christian people there, and a lot of people from Iran and from the Indian community. And basically, they're tired of the government allowing our streets to be dominated by what they regard as extremist Islamist elements. But the line that I said about the government ministers spending their time in synagogues and at Holocaust centres, that they would be better out in Lakemba telling some of those extremist preachers who were saying that Jews should be killed, that that's not the Australian way of talking, and we expect them to behave themselves. And if they don't have Australian citizenship, they should be out. The line that got particularly the biggest interest, because there are a lot of Israelis there who some of whom are Australian citizens, was about Tony Burke. And I explained that Tony Burke has instituted its discriminatory tourist plan where only young Israelis from the only democracy, no other democracies have it happen to them, whether it's Greece or the United States or the UK, where they are given a 13-page questionnaire interrogation by Tony Burke about their army service, who their relatives are, who else of their relatives served in the army. Very detailed 13-page interrogation. And people thought that was really unfair, that people from Russia or China, which are totalitarian states or authoritarian states, don't face similar interrogations by Tony Burke when they come to this country. And they think it's very unfair that Israelis, all of whom who have to do national service, and he knows that very well, are subject to this very detailed and very strange and, I would argue, suspicious interrogation. What are they accumulating all these details for, James? Who are they going to share them with? And what kind of action is being taken against innocent young people who come to this country as tourists?
Yeah, well, of course, these are young people from a country that I thought was one of our allies. And we're asking their young people, have you been involved in war crimes or genocide? I mean, it's just unbelievable. There was a fair bit of anger, obviously, at the Prime Minister at the rally yesterday. And I guess when you've got government ministers constantly sprouting anti-Israel messages like this.
We expect Russia to abide by international law and end its illegal and full-scale war on Ukraine. We expect China to abide by international legal decisions in the South China Sea. We expect Israel to abide by international law.
So be it anti-Semitism or Islamophobia.
The government's been criticised for always saying anti-Semitism alongside Islamophobia. James Macpherson says that's part of the problem, that you should just call out anti-Semitism for what it is, because it's worse now than anything else.
Sorry, so should we turn a blind eye to Islamophobia? Is that what the coalition's saying?
If James Macpherson thinks there's no Islamophobia in Australia, he's wrong.
He didn't say that, though. He said that when something happens, it should be enough to just denounce anti-Semitism.
He went on to say that they're not at the same levels.
I guess, Michael Danby, you can understand why so many Jewish Australians are pretty upset right now.
Well, again, James, I just want to emphasise that it was more than just Jewish Australians, and I think Australians generally don't like, and the polls show this domination of our streets by what they perceive as extremist groups. And this demonstration was a cry from the heart that represents most Australians, in my view, that, the ministers just don't get it. I mean, a synagogue has been burnt to the ground. I said I was coming from burnt Melbourne, and this was the winter of anti-Semitism in Australia that got a very strong reaction. It's just not good enough to talk about other discriminations which shouldn't exist, and if there's some graffiti on a bridge in Sydney, I'm against it too. But it doesn't compare with burning down a synagogue or blockading 300 people. It was in Sydney, this rally, in the Great Synagogue, which is in famous George Street in Sydney just last week. I think the Premier of New South Wales ought to be imitated by the Premier of Victoria, and there should be a ban on all blockades or political protests outside any religious institution, whether it's a Hindu shrine, a Jewish synagogue or a Catholic church.